Yeah, I mean, I've said it and I'll say it again. Your success as a manager is your success as a team. It doesn't matter if you come up with the best OKRs or all these things. Like your team needs to deliver and be successful and deliver their best. And they're going to want to deliver their best if you build this relationship with them.
Today's guest is Irina Stanescu, full-time engineering coach, course instructor, and former manager at Uber and Google. With Irina, we talked about her journey through Silicon Valley, big tech, and high-growth startups, balancing IC and management duties, and achieving impact through influence. So let's dive right into it after a short word from our sponsors. Elite software teams demand great efficiency and developer experience. We are talking high output reliability and morale. So what's their secret? They've hand-built a platform to power a continuous improvement loop. And now you can have that too. Sleuth is your platform to empower this continuous loop quickly, pinpoint areas needing improvement, implement those improvements instantly with automations, and automatically measure their impact continuously. Improve as elite teams do with Sleuth automations. Welcome, Irina, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Irina, you're a full-time engineering leadership coach, and before that, you've had a long and successful career working at big tech like Google and Uber, but even early-stage startups as well. And not only that, you're also a newsletter writer like myself, which is how I actually learned about you and your ideas in the first place. So I'm very excited to talk with you, and I would start with your journey. So how did you get into tech, then to Silicon Valley, up to full-time coaching today?
Yeah, yeah, I know. When I look back, I'm also surprised by, has it been this much? Has it been this long? Uh, it seems so long ago, but that's also because my tech journey doesn't start at college. Actually, starts at high school.
Oh, wow.
I'm originally from Romania, and I graduated from the computer science high school. So I learned to program in ninth grade. So, and also in Romania, we sort of have to pick our, profession when we go to university, so we don't get to
Okay.
experiment with various, programs and then make a decision. So for me, even though I wasn't totally sure I wanted computer science, because I'm a very creative person. I've always been a very creative person. So for me, architecture was also a contender. Um, but ultimately I decided to go with computer science because it's okay, and this is like high school level mindset, okay, about making important life decisions. I chose computer science because it was fun and easy. That's how
Yeah.
far, I thought. And then I thought, I'll figure it out later. Like for now, this seems like fun and easy. So I should go ahead and do it. And also it seems creative. Like I
Yeah.
actually chose computer science because I think it's a creative um, profession.
True.
So yeah, so that led me to university time, when I went to the Polytechnic University of Bucharest. You know how kids go to college, at least in the US, and they have their best, most fun years in
Yeah.
their lives and have a ton of fun? My university years were marked by homework.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had
Can
so
relate.
much homework. Yeah. So I think my best years came afterwards. But I really liked school. I really liked learning, and I really liked doing hands-on work, which was homework, right?
Yeah.
Um, which I think is why, like, what helped me actually get into Google right after.
Mm. So
And
you
that's
got
kind
into
of,
Google right after university.
yes. So
Wow.
I graduated in 2010, and then through a series of events, I had a friend who recommended me,
Okay.
referred me to Google. And this was 2010, okay?
Yeah.
There was no lead code. There were very few resources on how to prepare. I remember I prepared on Google
Yeah.
Docs, and there was this forum um, called Career Cop, where some people would just type in, "Oh, I interviewed with Google and I got asked this," so I got
Yeah.
a sense of the questions. It was, looking back, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So I interviewed with Google, and then in early 2021, so January, they extended me an offer. And to this day, I'm still like in disbelief. Did that happen? Because I was still in Romania at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Like, they
Yeah.
flew me over to California
Wow.
to interview. Um, and that's a crazy story as well, because I missed my flights. I had to reschedule my interviews. They lost my luggage. It's like a whole story. Maybe I should write about this story. It's kind of crazy. Um, yeah, so that's how I moved to California.
And so you moved to California straight from university. You joined Google as a software engineer, right? And then
Yeah.
I saw that after a while you had a great career and you got promoted into tech lead management role, right? Yes.
Yeah. At
How it
Google, it took
was?
me a little, yeah. Uh, and honestly, this is sort of a formative story for me, because I
Mm,
saw on myself the impact of good leadership, and
mm,
not my good leadership, my manager's good leadership, right? And how people can actually thrive and flourish even though maybe they don't think they can. Because that's the thing. I wasn't
mm,
necessarily like, I got into Google like majority of people did and still do, thinking, oh my god, they made a mistake.
yeah.
Like, they're gonna figure out they made a mistake hiring me. Massive imposter syndrome. It took me some time to
Not
find a
not
team.
even not even a native speaker, I guess, coming
Oh
from yeah.
yeah, I look. The first time I flew to the U.S. was when I had my interview. It was
Yeah.
for 3 days. The second time, it was when I moved.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So, massive imposter syndrome. Um, my first, like, I was trying to find a team that I liked, because the first team that I joined, which was ad serving, was kind of like, my manager left after 2 months, and I was sort of like, it was a lot of transition and um, kind of instability in a way. So it took me
Mhm.
some time to find a good manager, but when I did, rocket ship, boom.
Yeah. Makes such a
And that's,
difference.
I credit him. And honestly, my leadership skills, a lot, many of them come from him, and him setting a really good example, and him really understanding how to lead people.
Yeah. Yeah, a good manager
Um,
makes an incredible difference, just like a bad manager, right? You know how they say that people stay or leave companies because of managers, not because of the company itself.
yeah. Which takes me to getting into Uber. The reason why I joined Uber was because my manager from Google moved to Uber. Like, that's how much I really, really liked working for
Yeah.
him. I said, wherever you go, I'll go. The problem was that then he ended up deciding to move back to India, and I had to tell him that I can't move to
I
India.
I can't follow you in India. Yeah.
But to this day, we keep in touch. He's amazing. I owe him a lot. I'm very, very grateful for his support.
Yeah.
And he trusted me to become a tech lead. I
Yeah.
wasn't supposed to be a tech lead, because I mean, I wasn't supposed to. I was young. I was, I don't know, 27, something like that.
Yeah.
I ended up leading people that were more senior than me.
Yeah. It's tough.
But the reason he gave me these opportunities is because he saw potential in me that I didn't see.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I'm very grateful for. And that's the power of a good manager, right?
Yeah.
They can
Absolutely.
change people's lives. He changed my life.
Yeah. Sponsoring you for things that you don't even think you would be up to. And speaking of looking at potential, absolutely.
Yeah.
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 This is something that I noticed about your journey looking at it, that you had tech lead roles, I mean, tech lead and tech lead manager roles, both at Google, at Uber. And there is this notion that these roles can be kind of a trap, especially for first time managers, because you have to balance your IC and technical duties with the managerial duties, and especially for fresh engineers and fresh managers, it might be hard to find the right balance and being effective at both. So I wonder, how was it for you that you were even so young?
Yeah. So first of all, I didn't become TLM straight up. I became first a tech lead. I was a tech lead for a year before I became a tech lead manager. And so it builds up. I think that's the thing that I want to highlight about my entire career, is that it was built, like it wasn't just crazy jumps. Everything was built on top of prior success or prior accomplishments. So even with TLM, I didn't start up straight as a TLM. I figured out how to be a good TL first, and then I added the management piece. And then in addition to that, another stepping stone for TLM was that I hosted interns.
Hmm.
So when you have interns, you're a mini manager for them.
Yeah.
So I prototyped that. A lot of, the principles in building products can be applied in building careers and building anything, right?
Yeah.
And so because my intern did really well and I really enjoyed it, that's how I knew maybe I should give it a try. And that's why I didn't just jump straight to EM, because that's another question, right? What do you do if you like mentoring people? Should I become a manager? Is that enough reason to switch to management? And the answer is not quite. You need more answers. It's inconclusive. You need more data. But how can you get that data? By not fully committing. So,
Yeah.
managing interns is one of them. But like actually acting as a manager for that person, right?
Yes.
And not just, oh, you're there as a friend for the intern for 3 months.
Yeah.
Um,
And so you
so
decided intentionally to try the TLM route to maintain some more technical duties rather than jump straight into EM.
Yeah. So when I was a TLM, I was a senior engineer. My career plan at the time was to continue on the IC track until I became a staff engineer. I really wanted to be a staff engineer. I thought I wasn't not technical enough. I wanted more technical exposure to different things. And that's the thing, that's another reason why I left Google, is because I wanted more technical exposure. Google, and you might have heard about this, but they have a lot of in-house
Yeah.
technologies. And at the time, GCP wasn't a thing, so none of it was exposed. So you can't even say, okay, I'm learning how to use this tool or this piece of infrastructure, and that's transferable skill.
Yeah.
When I switched to Uber, I had to learn all these like open source things. And I remember a coworker of mine made a document translating like monitoring Grafana logs here, like so I had to learn all of this from scratch, like being on call. I didn't know how to use PagerDuty. I didn't know how to use anything because
Yeah.
everything was in house to Google, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't feel ready. I wanted to grow technically. I'm still a very technically curious person. Um, but I'm also human curious at this point, so it's hard to balance both. It's always been hard for me to balance both.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah. So, but the challenge was when I went to Uber, they didn't really have a TLM role.
Okay.
And they asked me, do you want to interview as an EM or do you want to like stay as a tech lead IC? And I said, I want to stay as a tech lead.
Yeah, at least as a tech lead. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's also that these roles are very fluid. So I guess
Mhm.
that when you go from company to company, what, or even I think even from team to team, what in a team you do as a TLM might be very similar to what in another team you do as a TL or
Yeah.
as an EM. There are teams with very hands-on EMs. So I guess you cannot just look at the labels, but you have to look at how the team actually works to figure out what you will be doing. I don't know, how was it
Yeah.
for you transitioning from Google to Uber in that sense?
Uh, that's a great question. But I also want to answer your question about being if the TLM is a trap. And
Yeah,
I liked how you said that it depends on the team how much of it. So if we picture two dials, right? One is like technical tech leading and the other one is managing, and how much of
yeah,
it each you have to do. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the the team. context. So how new the team is, the relationships between that team and the other teams, like all the managerial things that um, the team might need. Then it also depends on the individuals on the team. Do they need more
Yes.
support or less support? Um, and then kind of what's left is the tech leading and technical stuff. In my case, because the team was really new and because there was organizational sort of churn and transitions, I had to ramp up my manager dial when I was at
Yeah.
Google. And then only after, I think, 3 quarters, I like took it back. Now, the challenge with being a TLM is, why is it a trap? The problem is the companies that do have TLM roles don't have a separate track for them. They need to evaluate them on one criteria, which is the TLM criteria. It shouldn't be based on like you can judge a TLM on the IC track and you can judge a TLM on the EM track. So I think the problem isn't with the role. I think the role is necessary, especially in the, we talked about how does the manager role change lately and how hands-on, hands-off is
Yeah.
expected a manager to be. I think the EM ladders or the written expectations from the role need to be updated for a person who is a TLM to really succeed. So it's a trap because it's evaluated incorrectly, not because it's not necessary or a
Yeah.
valid role. I think it's an
Yeah.
absolutely valid role.
Yeah, and I think it's also like an intermediate role in the sense that, as you
Mhm.
said, you don't have a career ladder for TLMs. At some point, you need to stick either with the IC side or the EM side, right? So I don't know what were your prospects as a TLM, if you could get promoted and stay like a TLM, or you had to stick with one of the other two options at some point.
So most TLMs that I know at Google stayed on the IC track.
Mm.
They were managing at most, I mean, even 5 to 10, but they had significant technical contributions that they could use as promo justification on their promo package. So they still stayed on the IC track and they had to justify technical contributions.
Yeah, that's very
And that
interesting.
can be done if you have a very senior team, if the team is very well set up, if you can focus and have the capacity to focus on designing architecture or finding new problems.
Yeah. This is very
Yeah.
interesting. And you mentioned moving to Uber and having to relearn again, tooling and things that, at Google were done very Google way, right? Google is famous
Mhm.
for this kind of insular even culture. And did you find differences even in how the teams were run in the general culture? Did you have like trouble adapting, or there were things that were very different from one company to the other?
Yeah, totally. Uber was much more immature than Google. And you can see that from seniority of people, level of clarity in processes, um, how things were done essentially. Uh, but Uber had some great positives compared to Uber, which was Uber was moving so much faster.
Yeah.
And you can tell. Were they more inefficient? Sure. Were there different teams working on the same thing and having to deprecate one of them and sort of like duplicating work? Absolutely. And just to clarify for the audience, I'm talking Uber 2017,
Yeah.
not talking to the Uber today because like it's still 7 years later. And
Yeah.
even for me, the transformation from 2017 to 2020 when I left was noticeable.
Yeah, full hyper growth, I guess.
Yeah, when I joined, it was still hyper growth. When like 2018, when the CEO changed, and the reason why people like me were told that they were brought in is to help Uber mature.
Yeah.
They brought in people who were senior from other big organizations to um, make
Yeah.
Uber a world-class engineering organization,
Because you
right?
had process knowledge, even, right?
Yes.
How things were run in an established company, a bigger company that Uber wanted to become.
Yeah, but it was not easy because um, Uber's culture was in a way that they didn't really like top-down prescription of anything. So I had to come in, at least at Eats, and explain, I'm the tech lead, and here are my roles, responsibilities, and here's how we're going to work together. And I'm not here to boss you around. And, you know,
Yeah.
and I had to explain my role. Yeah, because
Yeah.
when I first started leading a project, people didn't really have a formal leader or tech lead, and everybody was just doing everything. Like, think about like chaos, pure chaos, and things were happening behind my back. Decisions were made behind my back that I wasn't involved in, and I had more context and knowledge. And
Yeah.
I had to
Chaos.
I had to
Chaos.
tell my team to slow down, and they didn't like that. Because that's the
Uh,
thing, right? You join a bigger company, it's natural that, when if you think about it as a ship, when you start turning much sooner than when the boat starts turning. Oh my god, I almost fell. And that's how it works. It's a big ship. You can't just turn and
yes.
expect it to instantly turn, right? So there was pain for sure. But
Yeah.
by the time I left 2020, things were much, much better. We already had some really good success stories and big project launches. And
Yeah, it was for sure a great growth experience, I guess. I mean, working through big changes and fast growth, I mean, forces you to reconsider many of the things you know, possibly. And you spoke about influencing other people and projects, maybe without having formal authority to do so, especially like in chaotic environments. And I know that impact through influence is one of your favorite topics. You've written a lot about it. So I think this is a nice segue to talk about it. And I wanted to ask first, why are you passionate about this topic of influence?
yeah, so multiple things is, in my roles, TLM, tech lead, and so on. Um, Influence had to be my bread and butter. It
Yeah.
even as a tech lead, you would think, oh, if someone on your team isn't performing, you have the authority to do something about it. Wrong. You have the authority to go to the manager and have the manager do something about it. You can give feedback, but like at the end of the day, if you don't have the authority to back it up, right? So then what do? You just at the mercy of the manager to always do things for you? Not really, right? You have to figure out how to make people, there's the three C's of influence: comply, concede, or change.
Hmm. Hmm.
Comply with something, concede, admitting when they're wrong, and change, replacing something with something else. So this was my bread and butter. And
Love
at the
this.
time, I didn't realize that this was what it was. It was more of a trial and error, and just me trying to figure out how to make my team do things and how to make other teams do things. And because when you don't have the manager title, it's a different angle. So I had to figure out what do I do? Like, how do I get anything done? Right. So I
Yes.
thought it was vital. Now, as a coach, I, work with people and I see their struggles and I see, them trying to do things, but sort of either giving up too soon or hitting some very common roadblocks in influence, which is they're very human roadblocks. So let's say they have a good idea, right? And they say, well, I brought it up to my manager and nothing happened. Nobody listened to me, right? So, and I said, well, been there, done that. So what are we going to do about it? Right? It's
Yeah.
not that, oh, we're not going into the very disempowering place of like, well, people hate me because they blah, blah, blah. They have, preconceived ideas. Or no, we try again. We try other strategies. We keep trying.
Yes.
And in the course, I discussed some really kind of crazy success stories that I've had where I was able to convince like entire teams to change trajectory 180 on projects, even though I was the only person in the room that disagreed. So the reason why I created this course is because I wanted to reverse engineer everything that worked for me and sort of teach it in a way so that others can apply it.
Yeah.
And
So
then the
what
other
you're
thing,
saying is, so what you're saying, I stopped you for a moment, that this
yeah, yeah.
topic about influence is completely horizontal. So it's not about managers or ICs. This is like a core skill for, whatever your role, because many things in a team, in a company happen not because of formal authority, but because of this kind of discussions from people who don't have any authority to make them happen, but they do.
But here's the thing, even and absolutely yes, it is a core skill because it's like the essence of collaboration, right? We collaborate because I'm able to say something and then you take that and think about it. Maybe I disagree with you and then we have this back and forth, right? It is the essence of collaboration, and it's, I think, a core also leadership trait. Um, and the other thing is, let's take it from the angle of a manager. Um, let's say they do have authority, right?
Hmm.
But if we think about who do they have authority over? They have authority over their direct chain of command, right? Like the
Yes.
people who report them. What about other team? Like, how are you going to, convince the other team to make some changes that you need for your own OKRs? Can you have authority over them? No. So unless you're the CEO, like the very head of the reporting
Yeah.
chain, your authority will be limited in depending on the context. And then the other thing is, good leaders and good, like anybody who wants to get anything done, I think what also matters is how we think about our results. So let's say I try to convince you of something. We have three potential um, outcomes. You can either commit, say, yes, Irina, I want to help you, right? Then the other thing is you can just comply, say, yes, fine, I'll do it. Fine, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And then the other one is, no, I'm not going to do it, right? Which is resistance. So it's commitment, compliance, and resistance. And what do we want? We want to maximize commitment. We want to maximize the number of people who say, yes, I want to do this. This is a great idea. Let's go, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to compared to like, fine, I'll do it. Because that over time builds resentment. If you keep going to people and say, do this, do this, do this, like, what about what do I think? You know?
Yeah.
So that's why even managers need influence because they want commitment. They want to get people excited. They don't want to just boss around because that's not best. That doesn't lead to the best results.
Yeah. So since this is a core skill, this is what we're saying. Like, how can you train and how can you improve on that? Like, I love what you mentioned at the beginning of the chat when you said that you had an intern which worked as kind of prototyping your management skills, and that was like the baby version of that. So, and that it trained you for that. So how can you train and improve your influencing skills?
Yeah. So when I was creating the course and I was reverse engineering what worked for me, I realized that one mistake that people make when they think about influence is that they focus on what is said or the moment of like I try to convince you of something, which is more persuasion than influence. And there's a lot that sits behind, like under influence, which is what motivated me to. I created my. It's like an influence pyramid framework that I created. So the bottom of the pyramid is mindset, which is personal power and how I approach influence. Like if I tell myself things that people shouldn't listen to me, and then I go try to convince people to listen to me, it's not going to work out, right? Or if I call them power leaks. It's kind of like the limiting belief. So we have to have a mindset that, we go in thinking that we're going to be listened to, right? So we need to work on ourselves a little bit. Then there's personal branding that sits on top of it. And personal branding, what I mean about personal branding, and I wrote about this, is like not the LinkedIn presence. Everybody thinks about
Mm.
the website, the public appearance, but personal branding is how you're perceived, period. The associations that anybody who interfaces with you in your
Mm.
day-to-day life, what associations they make about you, right? Because it's so much easier to go and influence someone who already thinks highly of you, or who, like, they will listen, right? That's a core question, is like, why should people listen to you? And so we're building a reason why people should listen to you. And so personal branding includes things like, how do you how are you intentional about showing expertise and track record and making yourself visible? And what are the things that you want people to remember about you,
Yeah.
and
And I
making
guess,
differentiating
and,
yourself?
and I guess when you're talking about this kind of personal branding, it's not how highly people think of you in general, but even about like specific things that are those you may be you may want to influence them about. Maybe you're a recognized expert in testing in your,
Yeah.
in teams, and so you have more authority talking about testing with somebody when you don't have the formal authority, but you're recognized as an expert, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and in the course, one thing we discuss is power, types of power. And power comes through authority, but it also comes through expertise,
Yeah,
right? So you want to be perceived as an expert in whatever, and that's what I'm guiding people through my personal branding framework, is to figure out what are your domains. But that's why it's so very similar to, when someone wants to, like, start posting on LinkedIn, they have to find their core pillars.
yeah,
So it's the same thing. These are your primary associations that people will make with you. So in people's minds, you occupy the, okay, testing expert, or databases expert, Cassandra expert, Postgres expert. Like, specifically, what do you do very well? Who, uh, if someone has a problem, or for example, I had a coworker who was incredible in incidents at Uber. Uber had a really, really good process of handling incidents if, there was a production issue or whatnot. And this person, his name is Dan. Hi, Dan, if you're watching. Um, he was incredible in crisis time, and everybody, when they needed an incident command for the outage, they're like, "Where's Dan? Where's Dan? We need
what would
Dan."
Dan do? Yes.
What would Dan do? Really, seriously, literally, we had this when Dan wasn't around. We were like, "What would he do?" Literally, right? And so he was incredible, right? So things like that. This is super important for influence, and people don't realize it. People, what happens with people sometimes, they say, "Oh, I have this great idea of this project. I want to get buy-in." But it's the first time they even say something. They're very silent and passive, and one day they have an idea, and then they wonder why people are like, "Who are you?" Like, you know.
Yeah,
So we work on creating this, not identity, but
yeah,
perception. We need to exist. We need to be visible, be known before we influence. So that's another layer in the pyramid. And then on top of that, we have building strategic relationships. We need relationships. And when in the course, I discuss some of the case studies, like, from my own experience, and explain how the fact that people knew of me, even though we hadn't worked together, helped me, because I was able to schedule some meetings, and they listened, right? So building strategic relationships. And I think we don't really get taught how to build relationships. We,
yeah.
have friends from college, or uh, growing up, but as adults, making new connections is hard. I don't know how
It's hard.
many cold outreach messages you get with people who just want things from you. That's that's
Yeah,
something I
yeah.
learned since with the
I get many.
newsletter, right? And I'm like, that's not how you form a friendship or a connection or anything. So we're talking about that, and then lastly, we talk about how to convince, how to listen. And those are things you can start practicing right away. Like, you don't have to want to influence in any direction to start building relationships. Start practicing that. So, to answer your question, how do you prototype these things? You start, I think one of the key principles is to make it about others. So start having interactions with people where you're truly there for the other
Yeah.
person, to
Not when you
listen,
need
to
something.
not when you need something. Yes, that's the thing. Influence isn't built when you need to influence.
Yes,
It's
love
built
this
before you
advice.
need to influence.
Yes, and I love this angle, because when you read most common advice about how to influence other people, it's usually very tactical advice, like how to speak, what to say, in how to shape your message. But what we're saying is that it's like an iceberg, and the part that is under the water, that you have built throughout the time where you didn't need anything, but you have built the relationship, you have built the credibility. It's actually what matters the most, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And surely we discuss tactical things and they're important, but they're not as effective if you don't have. And it's so funny you mentioned the iceberg because I do have literally an iceberg illustration in the course. And it is an iceberg. That's, there's the unseen side of influence.
Yeah, yeah. I love this. And how is influence different as a skill, if it is any different between uh, engineering duties and engineers, what they need to be able to achieve through influence in their daily duties versus, for example, a manager role?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for engineers, there's some overlap in the two. But for engineers, for example, if they have an idea and they want to get buy-in, I think that's a very common use case. Or if they want to, let's say, negotiate
Yeah,
different conditions for their projects. So extended timeline or descoping or changing scoping, or maybe they disagree. Maybe their product managers comes and wants to build something and they say, I don't think this is a good idea.
yeah,
So it's more around the outcome, the scope of their work, their projects, right, their deliverables. um and with management, it can be about different things, like for example you disagree with how they plan to do a reorg, or you want to get more headcount, or it's kind of it's similar, right? But both, for example, engineers and managers, what if they work with someone who has this bad habit of, I don't know, not putting something in the PR description or something like this? When it comes to people things and helping people change or improve, both managers and ICs need influence.
yeah, yeah. That's a great answer.
There's so many examples. If you think about it, everything that needs to get done is there's some sort of influence that you need. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we have talked a lot about good management, and you have gone through in your career companies had from different eras, from Google, Uber, and then after that even early stage startups, and now you are a full-time coach that works with many engineering managers. So I know this is a very broad question, but what does it mean to you, based on what you see from your point of view, to be a good, a helpful engineering manager in 2024? Have you seen an evolution of the role? Are you seeing trends? Do you have like some spicy opinions on this?
Yeah. So the trends that I've been seeing is that it's becoming increasingly more difficult to be a manager, and there's a ton on your plate. And the reason why is this happening is because, and this is a theme I've heard a lot, everybody wants to do more with less.
Yeah,
So they want to do more, execute more with fewer managers, fewer managers, fewer ICs if possible. And so then it becomes a question of being really efficient.
yeah.
And
So
sometimes
do
you
you
might need
think
to do, yeah.
do you think this trying to do more with less is like an evergreen theme, or is getting stronger because of the economic downturn and everything that has been going on, layoffs, and so it's harder in this time of history?
That's a great question. I think for anybody who worked in a startup, they would say it's an evergreen theme,
Yeah,
because in startups, a lot finances impact your decision making, and it took me actually working for an early stage startup to figure that out. You always take into account the runway if you're led by a good, leadership team, because we've
you
seen,
should
all the
at
stories
least.
of, yeah, we know all the stories of startups running out of money, right? Just throwing money left and right and not being financially, what's the fiscally responsible.
Yeah.
But at an early stage startup, that's where pressure is felt. Um, but with bigger companies, I think we were in at least at Google when I was like, they had abundant money to spend. I think when I forgot when, like 2015, when Ruth, the CFO, joined, like they started like cutting costs and being more efficient. So that's a trend that I've started seeing then. Um, but now I think it's even more because of the economic conditions,
Yeah.
right? And even like it's startups want to extend their runways. Again, I don't want to speculate about the big tech companies that had record earnings and still had layoffs.
Yeah.
And I know for sure that there's investor pressures, or there have been investor pressures to make cuts, right? And I think when leadership teams want to keep people, they need to actually have a justification that it makes sense. And how does it make sense? Well, this person is bringing this much money to the company, or they can, I mean, you can't really associate a number, but you have to be valuable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're valuable is if you're efficient with your work, right? And then back to the question of what does it mean to be helpful is it goes into the scaling yourself and making others better,
Hmm.
right? And when I say a helpful manager, it's kind of the same with influence. You don't build influence when you need to influence. And the same way, a manager shouldn't become helpful when they need to help, if that makes sense. Like to help someone, you need a relationship with them. You need trust. You need to build that. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that I see managers forgetting when times are stressful. I have clients that, their manager said, well, I have all these pressures, I don't have time for one-on-one. So I see them cutting corners from the places where they absolutely should not.
Shouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I also see, oh, I can focus on the charter and OKRs and all the strategy and all these things. And then, well, what do you do when you have a low performer? Where I figure out what the problem is and I go deliver the feedback and then job done.
Yeah.
No, your job is not done. Your job is to help this person solve this problem, not just say, okay, here's the package feedback, throw it on over their fence and say, you fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally resonates. And when you see when you say that it's about trying to do more with less and having and putting more things on plates of managers, possibly, uh, are we talking about more direct reports than before, than in the past, or more hands-on contribution, more technical contribution, maybe? Are there any trends on that you can spot?
um I don't think I have enough data, but the data that I have, people I didn't see, from what I know, or people that I've worked with, they didn't necessarily have to start coding, but they were asked to be prepared to.
Mm.
But
Which
their headcounts
what
were
does it even mean, if you ask me? I mean, if somebody told me that, I would ask, okay, and then and now what?
like, be ready to pick up tasks from the backlog. I don't know. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but headcounts, nobody really got new headcounts, and like hiring was frozen, and even backfills for the roles that they did lay off. And then there has been kind of a general anxiety around, if I collaborate with this team, will my team be less important? And these are concerns raised by their
Mm.
reports,
Mm.
and which is kind of bad because it creates
Of
this
course.
toxicity, lack of trust between teams. Like, sure, in our team we're fine, we're collaborating, we like each other, we're all in this together. But then helping others, why would I help others if that will make my team less necessary? Like, maybe because I'm helping this other team, maybe my team will get slashed at the next
Yeah.
round
Yeah,
of layoffs. So there's
you're switching to this kind of zero sum mindset, right?
Yeah.
It's very negative, I think. It's
Yeah.
not only for collaboration. I mean, I think in general.
Yeah. But these are all real things that I'm hearing from people.
So you think this is because of the pressure to demonstrate the value that you're bringing to the table, talking of managers,
Exactly.
talking of teams. So if you're an engineering manager, what are the best strategies? How you can demonstrate your value, right? If you think about the most successful managers that you've been working with, uh, can you isolate qualities or things that they were able to do about that?
So I think, and it's not even about being a people manager or people like people managers throw in all these buzzwords like people first. What does that mean? Like I understand people first, but be more, show it.
Yeah.
And when your team is motivated, because that's the other thing, right? If they are stressed, people don't deliver good work, right? So if they're in this environment, so I feel like they have to double down on reassuring their teams or making sure that they can deliver despite the uncertainty, and not, pretend the uncertainty doesn't exist, but acknowledge it and bring the team even closer together.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, I think they need to double down on things like psychological safety. And surely, like, not forgetting that managers need to manage up, need to build relationships across, need to that's why I'm saying it's really hard to be a manager these days. It's very, very difficult. So kudos to everyone doing it.
Kudos to those who do it for sure. So
Not all
Irina,
heroes
yeah.
wear capes.
Yes, exactly. So Irina, thank you so much for this chat. It was awesome. I took many notes, and so thank you again for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a great time chatting with you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.